Ice had been coming down on Clarksburg, West Virginia since noon, the kind that doesn't announce itself as ice until you're already standing on it. Gunnery Sergeant Leon Mays had been driving through on his way back to Morgantown when his truck lost traction on Route 19, and the guardrail made a decision for him. No one hurt. But the rear axle had a different opinion about the rest of the evening. He was standing in the cold, trying to get a toe on the line when Hatch pressed his nose to the window, then stood. Then made one short sound that had nothing to do with the guardrail. 20 yards off the road, set back behind a bare oak that had grown too close to the house over the years, was a ranch-style house with a porch light on, and a man sitting in the cold in a lawn chair with a blanket across his lap. Alone, in the dark, in the ice. What Leon Mays learned over the course of that one night, the one he had not planned to spend in a town he had only stopped in because a guardrail made him, would surface a truth about a family that had been quietly, carefully, and completely lying to itself for 2 years. If this is the kind of story you stay for, subscribe now, so you're here when the next one comes. Leon had joined the Marines at 22. After 2 years of community college and the specific restlessness of a man who has not yet found the shape of his own seriousness. He grew up in Fairmont, 20 minutes up Route 19 from Clarksburg, in a house where his father worked the line at a glass plant until the plant closed, and then worked everything else. The way men of that generation worked everything else, without complaint and without apology, because that was what you did. Leon had carried that understanding into the Marines the way you carry something given to you before you were old enough to choose it, and he had found, to his own quiet surprise, that it fit. He served 14 years in force reconnaissance, including 3 deployments that are documented and one that isn't, and he came home to Morgantown in 2020 with a permanent ringing in his right ear, a left shoulder that required negotiation on cold mornings, and a version of himself that was competent and contained and privately unsure what to do with peace. He taught a veterans transition course at the university now. He drove to every session with Hatch in the back seat and arrived 10 minutes early. Because arriving 10 minutes early was one of the habits that had survived the transition intact, and he did not see any reason to change it. Hatch was a 3-year-old German Shepherd, sable and black, with a kind of focused stillness that made people nervous at gas stations and comfortable in rooms where something was wrong. Leon had gotten him through a veterans K-9 program 18 months ago, and the two of them had found their understanding quickly, the way some partnerships do, not through process, but through recognition, as though they had already agreed on the terms somewhere before the introduction. Hatch slept at the foot of Leon's bed and woke up 30 seconds before Leon's alarm every morning and waited with the patient dignity of a dog who knows what's coming and has decided not to make a thing of it. The man in the lawn chair was named Earl Pettis. He was 83 years old. He had lived in that ranch house on the edge of Clarksburg for 38 years, had bought it in 1986, the year his daughter Renee was born, with the intention of raising something stable in a county that had seen its share of instability. He had worked 22 years for the Benedum Airport in Bridgeport. Ground operations, the kind of work that required precision and reliability and a willingness to be outside in West Virginia, whether at 4 in the morning, and he had brought all 3 to every shift without exception. He had also served Army 1963 to 1967, before Vietnam was what it became, in the specific in-between years that history tends to blur past. He had been stationed in West Germany for 18 months and Korea for 12. And he had come home to Harrison County and built a life with a woman named Gloria, who had died of cancer in 2017. And whose reading glasses were still on the nightstand because Earl had never found a reason to move them. His daughter Renee lived 40 minutes away in Bridgeport. His son-in-law was a man named Phil Caruso. They had 2 children who called Earl on his birthday and Christmas, and occasionally forgot which of those fell first. Renee had been the kind of daughter who visited every Sunday until Gloria got sick, and then every Sunday while Gloria was sick, and then less often after Gloria died, not out of cruelty, not from indifference, but from the specific exhaustion of grief that nobody talks about, which is the grief of the people who survive and find that the person they have always been in a family no longer has the same place in it. The arrangement had been changing for 2 years. The Sundays had become every other Sunday, and then the first Sunday of the month, and then a call, instead of a visit when something came up, which something increasingly did. Phil had mentioned at Thanksgiving last year, and then again at Christmas, that the house was a lot for one person to manage, that the drive was getting longer somehow even though the distance hadn't changed, that there were very good facilities in Clarksburg and Bridgeport both, where Earl could have company and proper attention. Earl had listened to this twice and said nothing both times, because he was the kind of man who measured a response by whether it would change anything, and he had already calculated that it wouldn't. The lawn chair was where he went when the house got quiet in a way he couldn't manage. Gloria had put that chair on the porch the summer before she got sick, and Earl had kept it there through 4 winters, because it was hers, and it was real, and the porch was where you kept what was real, when everything inside felt emptied out. That was where Leon found him. Leon came up the walk with Hatch at his side and his hands in his jacket pockets, moving with the specific careful pace of a man walking on ice who doesn't have anything to prove about it. He came up to the porch steps and stopped. Hatch had already gone up 2 steps, sitting down level with the arm of Earl's lawn chair, his head tilted in the specific way that was not curiosity and not alarm but something closer to recognition. "Evening," Leon said. Earl looked at Hatch. He looked at Leon. He took in the bearing and the posture and the quiet way Leon stood on a porch at night in the ice, with no particular agenda visible, and something in the set of his shoulders shifted 1 degree. "You're the one who hit the guardrail," he said. "Yes, sir," Leon said. "Tow's going to be a while in this weather." "Yes, sir." Earl looked at Hatch again. Hatch had not moved. "He can come up on the porch," Earl said. "It's cold at that level." Hatch came up. He did not sit beside Leon. He sat beside Earl, close enough that his shoulder was against the side of the lawn chair, and Earl put 1 hand on his back without looking down, the automatic gesture of a man who has had a dog in his life and lost that too, and simply accepted the contact as something he hadn't known he needed until it was there. "You want some coffee?" Earl said. "I'll get it," Leon said. "Tell me where. Have you ever known someone like Earl? Someone who lost the person who made the house feel like a home, and who kept sitting on the porch in the cold because the porch was the last place that still belonged to both of them? If that person is still in your life, go sit with them. If they're not, type their name in the comments. They deserve to be remembered." The coffee took 15 minutes because the kitchen told Leon things about the house that the porch hadn't. The refrigerator with enough food for 3 days. The prescription bottles lined up on the counter in the way of a man managing his own medication without anyone to check the calendar. The stack of unopened mail near the toaster that had the specific geometry of things that have been, accumulating since the last time someone organized them. Leon did not say anything about any of it. He brought 2 mugs to the porch and sat down on the step because there was only 1 chair, and Hatch stayed where he was. They talked until midnight. This was the thing Leon had not expected. Not the length of it, but the quality of it. The specific texture of a conversation between 2 men who have served and come home and know what the other one is carrying without having to name it. Earl talked about West Germany in 1964. the particular cold of the Rhine Valley in January. The sergeant from Alabama, who had been the best card player Leon had ever heard described. He talked about ground operations, about the way aircraft move at 4 in the morning when the field is dark and the runway lights are the only thing that looks like the world is still going. He talked about Gloria, not in the way people talk about grief, but in the way people talk about a person they are still in conversation with, as though the conversation hadn't ended, just changed its terms. Leon talked about Morgantown and the transition course, and one deployment he could speak about in general terms, and one he could speak about in none. He talked about Hatch. He talked about his father working the glass plant, and what it had given him that he hadn't known was a gift until much later. He did not talk about the staff sergeant from his 3rd deployment named Avery Goodall, who had been killed outside Saint-Jean in 2013, and whose name Leon wrote down every November 10th in a notebook he kept in his truck. Because some things are not yet ready to be spoken aloud, and Leon knew the difference. Around 11, Hatch got up from Earl's side and went to the front door of the house. He stood there, not scratching, not restless. Standing with his nose just below the door handle, his attention fixed on whatever was on the other side, with a precision that meant he had already reached his conclusion. Leon looked at Hatch. He looked at Earl. "What's in there?" Leon said. Earl was quiet for a moment. "Guest room," he said. "Renee uses it when she used to use it." "Used to?" "Phil thinks it'd be better to put me somewhere." Earl said it flat, the way you say something you have said silently to yourself many times. "More practical," he said. "Renee hasn't pushed back on it much." He paused. Last time she came, she brought a brochure. Hatch had not moved from the door. Leon got up and opened it. The guest room had not been used as a guest room in some time. The bed was made. Earl's work, tightly done. A military corner on the left side that had not come from civilian life, but on the dresser, in a neat stack, was a set of folders. Leon crossed to them. The top folder was from a care facility in Clarksburg called Riverside Gardens. It contained a preliminary intake assessment, already partially filled out. Name, date of birth, primary physician. The handwriting was not Earl's. The date at the top was 3 weeks ago. Behind it was a second folder from a facility in Bridgeport. Behind that was a single-page document that Leon read twice, slowly, standing in the guest room while Hatch sat in the doorway and Earl said nothing from the porch. It was a real estate pre-listing agreement. The property address was this house. The date was 2 weeks ago. It had not yet been signed, but the signature line had Earl's name printed beneath it and a small penciled check mark in the margin beside it, the kind a person makes when they intend to return to something. Leon stood there for a moment. He thought about the stack of unopened mail, the prescription bottles lined up alone, the chair on the porch that had been there through 4 winters. He thought about the word Phil had used, practical, and the specific weight that word carried when it was applied to a person instead of a problem. He put the folders back exactly as he'd found them. He went back to the porch. He sat on the step. He picked up his coffee. "Earl," he said, "what did they call you when you were working the field?" Earl looked at him. "Not your name," Leon said. "What they called you." Earl was quiet for a moment. Then something in his face shifted. Not much, but enough. "Pet," he said. "Just Pet. Sergeant Pet before I got out." He looked at Hatch, who had come back to the lawn chair and was sitting again with his shoulder against it. "I haven't heard that name in a while. It fits you," Leon said. Earl looked at him. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "No," Leon said. "But I know what fits." What Hatch did next was the kind of thing that, described afterward, sounds smaller than it was. He stood up from beside the lawn chair. He turned. He put his head across Earl's knees and stayed there, not briefly, not as a passing gesture, but with the full deliberate weight of a dog who has decided that this is where he is, and that this is not a temporary arrangement, and that the man in this chair is worth the full deployment of everything he has. Earl put both hands on Hatch's head. He did not say anything. He looked out at the dark yard and the ice and the bare oak that had grown too close to the house over the years, and he stayed like that for a long time. If you were sitting on that step right now, knowing what Leon had just seen in that guest room, knowing what Hatch had just decided, what would you have done next? Type yes or no below. I read every comment. The tow came at 1 a.m. Leon left his number with Earl and drove back to Morgantown with Hatch in the back seat and the folders on the guest room dresser in his mind like something he was still reading. But the real secret, the one that hadn't surfaced yet, was still sitting in that house, waiting for Leon to look at the right document. He called a veterans legal aid coordinator named Dottie Frazier in Clarksburg the next morning. Dottie had worked Elder Veterans Affairs for 9 years and had, in that time, developed a very specific tone of voice for a very specific category of situation. The flat, careful, unsurprised tone of a person who has seen the pattern so many times that surprise is no longer available to her, but whose anger at it remains entirely intact. Leon described the intake assessments and the real estate pre-listing and the signature line with the penciled check mark. Dottie was quiet for 3 seconds. "Who filed his VA benefits claim?" she said. Leon said he didn't know. Dottie said she would find out. What she found, by that afternoon, was that Earl Pettis had never had a VA benefits claim filed at all. He had served 4 years, qualified by length and era of service, and the application that would have provided him in home support, healthcare supplements, and a caregiver stipend had never been submitted. Dottie's voice when she called Leon back was the voice of a woman who has been doing this work long enough to know that the absence of a filing is sometimes an oversight and sometimes a choice, and that the difference between the two is usually visible in what happens next, specifically in whether the person who stood to benefit from the absence has a pending real estate transaction on a property they don't own. Phil Caruso had held power of attorney over Earl's financial affairs since Gloria died. The urgency came on a Thursday, and a call from Earl himself, the first time Earl had called Leon's number, and the shortness of the call told Leon everything before Earl had said 3 sentences. Renee and Phil were coming on Saturday. They were bringing a notary. The signature line on the pre-listing agreement had a date now. Leon drove back to Clarksburg on Friday. He brought Dottie, who drove herself. He called his brother in Fairmont, who had known Earl by reputation from the airport, and arrived with the specific quiet purposefulness of a man settling a debt he has been waiting to settle. And he called a woman named Connie Merritt, who was 76 years old and had been Gloria's closest friend for 40 years, and who said, when Leon explained the situation, simply, "I'll be there at 9. Phil Caruso arrived at 10:15 on Saturday morning. Renee, behind him, a notary behind her in a separate car, all the orderly machinery of a thing that has been scheduled and prepared and is expected to conclude without incident. Because the people who arrange these things tend to believe that their own preparation is the same as the other person's acceptance. Phil knocked, and Leon opened the door. Hatch was at Leon's left side, positioned forward, his body angled between the door and the interior of the house where Earl sat. The sound that came out of him was low, without break, and without any quality that could be mistaken for greeting. Phil looked at the dog. The dog looked at Phil with the steady and complete attention of an animal who has spent the night on a man's porch and has already decided what category this visitor belongs to. When Phil moved to step through the door, Hatch's weight shifted forward. One smooth movement, closing the gap, and Phil stopped. Leon stepped back, and Phil came in. Slowly, reading the room the way a man reads a room when it has not arranged itself the way he expected. Dottie was at the kitchen table with her folder. Leon's brother Marcus stood near the window. Connie Merritt sat beside Earl on the couch. Earl's couch. In Earl's living room. In the house that had Earl's furniture and Earl's photographs and the reading glasses still on the nightstand where Gloria had left them. Earl wore a button-down shirt that Connie had pressed that morning. He sat straight. He looked like exactly what he was. A man who had served his country and built a life and was still here, in that life, in the house he had bought the year his daughter was born. Phil's voice, when he spoke, had the smoothed-over quality of a man who has rehearsed. He said he was there because he was concerned. He said this was about Earl's well-being, his safety, his quality of life. He said the house was a lot and the winters were hard and there were good options available and the family had discussed it thoroughly. Renee had not looked at her father since she walked in. The room was quiet. Then Earl said, "Renee, they said I was a burden." 6 words. Quiet. Looking at his daughter, not at Phil, at Renee. The way a father looks at a child when he needs her to understand something that has been true for a long time and hasn't been said. Renee looked up. She looked at her father's face. She looked at the room, at Dottie's folder, at Connie sitting beside Earl on the couch, at Hatch standing between the doorway and the man Phil had called a burden in a conversation Renee had been present for and had not stopped. Her face changed. Phil began to speak. Leon's voice came in underneath it, not over it, underneath it, the specific register of a man who is finished waiting. He named the VA benefits application that had never been filed. He named the power of attorney date. He named the pre-listing agreement and the signature line and the penciled check mark in the margin. He named Avery Goodall, not because Avery was part of this story, but because the dead deserve to be named in the rooms where the living are being diminished. And Leon had carried that name long enough to know when it was time. He said, Earl Pettis served this country for 4 years. He worked a field in West Germany in January cold. He built this house and raised a daughter in it, and kept his wife's chair on the porch through 4 winters. He is not a burden. He is a man. And the paperwork that was never filed is going to be filed, and the pre-listing agreement is going to be reconsidered, and if anyone in this room has a different idea about what happens next, Dottie Frazier is the person to discuss it with. Phil looked at the notary. The notary looked at her own hands. Hatch did not move until Phil's car was off the street and out of sight. Then he walked to the couch and lay down across Earl's feet with the easy authority of a dog who is exactly where he belongs. And Earl put his hand on Hatch's back and looked at his daughter, who was still in the room, who had not left with Phil, who was looking at her father's face like a person remembering something she had let herself forget. Connie Merritt put the kettle on. What happened in the weeks that followed moved through the east side of Clarksburg the way things move through neighborhoods where people have been watching quietly and waiting for something to change. Through the VFW post on Pike Street and the parking lot of the Presbyterian Church where Gloria had sung in the choir for 22 years. And the counter at the diner on Main where Connie told the story twice, and both times there were people who already knew the shape of it. Dottie filed the VA benefits claim. The retroactive eligibility calculation covered 2 years. The pre-listing agreement was withdrawn. Phil Caruso's name appeared in a consultation with Dottie's office that he had not anticipated being as thorough as it was. Renee came back the following Sunday. She brought food. She stayed 4 hours. She did not bring a brochure. The reading glasses were still on the nightstand. Leon noticed this on his second visit, in December, when he drove down from Morgantown with Hatch and a box of his mother's Christmas cookies, because his mother had asked where he was going, and when he told her she had gone directly to the kitchen. Earl had made coffee in the percolator the way he'd been making it since 1968, which was strong enough to require a decision about. And the three of them, Leon, Earl, Hatch, sat at the kitchen table while the ice came down outside again and the house held the warmth of a place that has been given back to itself. There are moments in a life that look like accidents, but aren't. A guardrail on a wet road, a dog who stands up at a window, a porch light burning in the dark. The arrangement of it does not ask to be explained. It asks only to be received. Leon Mays had not planned to stop in Clarksburg. The guardrail had its own ideas. Hatch stood up, and in the specific way that men trained to make decisions under pressure make decisions, quietly, without announcement, as an action rather than a speech. Leon got out of his truck and walked up a porch that wasn't his and sat down on the step and stayed until he understood what he was sitting next to. He had the same night anyone else had. He simply did not spend it somewhere warm. This story is for every man and woman who served, came home, built something with their hands, and deserved better than the word burden. And for anyone who has ever looked at a person the world had written off and called them, instead, exactly what they were. Is there an Earl in your life? A veteran? A parent? A neighbor who has been made to feel like too much? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one. Let's fill this section with names that were never a burden to anyone. Every story on this channel is about refusing to use that word. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.